Hey guys, tonight let's talk about a couple of different ways to get access to the core on American and some other brand locks. And in some cases we're just going to get access to the core. In other cases we're going to have to compromise the lock first before we can get access to the core. So those are two different situations that we might be facing. Now, why might you be facing that? Well, in the case of a lock, you can, like this, you can see it's already open, so common sense tells you I put a Phillips screwdriver in there and then I simply remove that screw. The problem is that these screws are the cheapest component in the lock, and so many times moisture will get in and these heads will start to rust, so when you put a Phillips in there, it'll strip out. Now I like to blame that on my kids or my boss. I mean, I never do it, but and my kids are forbidden to use my hand tools. I mean, they're allowed to play with fire, but that's it. So my boss often strips out these heads, which means I can't get the core out. He's stripped it and I'm screwed. So I've got to find a way to get into it. There's other times you might need to get in there, and it's not just American. For example, if you have master locks that you want to do, they have the same, I don't want to call it a defect, but the same system. And when those heads of the screws strip out, you don't have any way to get in there other than what I'm getting ready to describe. A third time you might want to be able to get in there is when you have one of the older American locks, and a lot of you have seen these. I don't like people doing this to my locks and just getting access with a bypass tool. And so I like to put the discs in. The problem with that is that in these older locks, as I think we've talked about before, if you look closely, there's a rivet down inside of there. So it's non-replaceable. We can't simply unscrew it, remove the core, and then put it back. We have to get rid of that rivet so that we can replace the entire guts and therefore toughen up these older locks by pinning up all 6 cylinders and putting the disc in. So how do we do that? Well, here we go. There's a couple of ways to get into these locks. If this is the weak part, we need to get that core out. If we attack, this is an armored plate, and if we attack this, we actually have to cut through the body of the lock to remove this small piece. And that's not a very efficient way to do it, because now we've destroyed the most valuable part of the entire lock. So that's not an option. We might choose to attack this retainer nut. But this retainer nut, in most cases, is case-hardened steel. And I want you to think of case-hardened steel as kind of like an egg. They harden it. I mean, it's a cost-saving measure, so they only partially harden it. They harden the outside, the skin of it is hardened, whereas the internal metal, and particularly in the thick parts, like you would find up in this area, remains soft. But because it's hardened steel, or at least case-hardened steel, this is not the softest target either. So since we do have access from the inside, when our lock is open and we simply have a stripped head, it makes sense to attack the softest part of the entire security thread, and that would be this screw. Now, how might we do that? Well, you can see that these are Phillips. And even when they are stripped, the deepest part of the Phillips is in dead center. So we don't even have to put a punch in it. Even if it's stripped out, the center of this is the deepest. So we're simply going to take a drill and we're going to drill down through there. Now, the drill dimension, you might want to write this down. In the US, there's a couple ways to figure it out. I'll tell you it's 9/64 of an inch. And the way I figured that is I measured the diameter of the screw and I took a drill bit just slightly wider. There's a second way. For you Europeans, by the way, that's 3.7 millimeters. There's a second way to figure it out. If you don't know or you don't have that particular size, any size drill will do as long as it fits. If you can see through there, there's a hole. And as long as you find a drill that is smaller diameter than that hole, it will work perfectly. So if it's larger, unfortunately, you'll ruin the lock. So make sure it's a smaller diameter. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go in from the top of the lock, and we're going to place the tip of the drill in the cross of the Phillips, and we're simply going to drill it. And we're only going to drill it down about that far. And this is the head of a screw that I've already drilled out. And you can see we don't have to drill very far. We just have to drill through the head, and since it's a larger diameter than the shaft, as soon as we break through the screw head, the entire security system that holds this thing together will fail. This falls out and the core falls out, ball bearings fall out, everything, and we've gained access. So that's the first system we're going to talk about. So before I talk about this other one, why don't we go do that and prove whether or not it works. Alright, we got our padlock clamped up safely in the vise so it's not going to bust our knuckles. And all we need to do, I'm going to take a battery powered drill to prove to you this can be done in the field. I'm going to place it directly on the cross hatching as best I can here of the Phillips screwdriver head, so it should self-center when we put it in there. And then start drilling. And then if I feel like I've drilled a little bit and I feel I've drilled far enough, I might just take a punch and knock it all out. Usually I drill all the way through, and as soon as I do, all the guts just fall out the back. So let's see if we can't make this work. And there we go. And let's see if we can get this thing out of the clamp here. And you see the screw has come out. And let me move the camera just a hair. Trying to keep everything framed up. And then we just tap it, all the guts come out. And there you go. And then if you really want all the guts, the rest of the actuator and everything, the ball bearings, simply give it a few good taps. And usually it pops out. Sometimes it helps if you re-secure it. In this case it won't work because this hasp is bent, but just to give it a few good cracks, the core comes right out. As soon as that happens, you said it, there we go, it all comes apart. And now we can start the rebuilding process. We can start cleaning everything up, put everything on the buffer, clean it up, and make a new lock out of it. Okay, that one worked out pretty good. In fact, it couldn't have worked out better. Here's the piece that we drilled out of the first one. And if you notice, we drilled through the head perfectly. There's just a little bit of the head left there, but this is exactly what we were after. So the only thing this cost us is this screw, and believe me, those are really cheap. So we're just going to pull that out and we can recycle everything on that first lock. Well, not everything is so easy. Many times we get these locks and they're more like this. They're locked and we can't get in them for some reason. Maybe somebody has put epoxy or crazy glue in the keyway or broken something off in there that we can't get out. In the case of this one, I don't know how long this was outside. It's corroded and I just am not able to pick it. And you know, maybe somebody like this put grease inside of it years ago and now it's all gummed up. So it's just not pickable. Well, we can't attack this one from the top. The hasp is in the way. And sometimes we get them like this. They're broken. But again, when they're broken, this one has the hasp still broken inside of there, so drilling is not an option, but I'd still like to recover this. All it needs is a new hasp and some repinning and we can recycle it. I mean, after all, since Master did do away with these super lock cores, I mean, it's our sacred duty to preserve as many of these as we can, right guys? So that's what I'm trying to do here. Alright, so how do we get into these now? Well, we can't pick it. We can't bypass it because these are key retaining, so what can we do? Well, again, let's go back and review the components that hold this thing together. The armored steel armor plate, it's not going to happen. We can't access the weakest part of the chain, which would be this screw, because it's covered up by the haft, so that's not going to be an option. That leaves us only one thing to attack, and that would be this piece here, which is case hardened, and we're never going to be able to punch it. It's too hard, and we're never going to be able to drill it, as is. So we're going to have to figure out how to do it. Well, here's how. All we need to do, see if I can find the proper hasp. Here we go. We need to grind off, take our grinder or Dremel tool and grind off that outer skin. That's the hardened part. Once we ground off the outer skin, we've caused no damage to any of the other parts of the lock. We grind off the outer skin and then we take a center punch and we punch a hole in the center to guide our drill, and we're going to drill down inside of there. We're going to drill down a hole, as you see here. And the size that we're going to use for this exercise will be a 13/64 or a 5mm. Now again, we don't have to drill very deep. We've only got to drill about this deep. Now you can see I drilled this one and I went a little bit too far. We don't even have to go that far. We need to drill down far enough to weaken the structure so that when we take a punch and we stick the punch into that hole and we hit it with a hammer, it will shear. Come on, baby, focus. It will shear right there and punch through the lock, or failing that, if you use a narrow enough punch, see it's not as wide as the hole that we drilled, when we hit it, that entire rim, that thin rim that remains, will then fold up around the punch and punch all the way through this armor plate. So that's what we're going to try to do next. So let's see if we can make that happen. Okay, we got her clamped up. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we need to grind off the skin of the case hardened piece of the retainer nut. So I'll use my Dremel tool. Okay, and we know we need to make a punch, something for our drill to guide on, otherwise it'll skitter around. So just try to get as close as you can to the center. Give it a little lick. And now in this case, I'm going to use a slightly smaller drill before I move to the larger one, just to drill a pilot hole. Sometimes that's just a little bit easy. Okay, we don't have to go too deep. And then once we got a starter hole, then I'll put the larger drill. It's just a little bit safer. We don't have to worry about it, you know, sliding off and hitting us in the hand or anything. Okay, once we get through there, all we really need to do at this point is drop everything on the floor. Just take a punch, slide it in the hole, and give it a couple of good licks. Let me make sure this vise is tight. And there, it's already breaking off. You see the rim already starting to fail. And we just give it a couple more licks and we are through. And there you go. The base plate comes right off and then the cylinder will come out. Let me move this around just a hair so you can see. All the guts now come out. Everything we were after. Now, the shackle we can knock everything out just as we did before. All the guts come out. The shackle comes out. And we have all the valuable parts. Everything now we have except for that retainer, and of course those are about 6 cents each. Now we can rebuild this lock. Now we do have an added problem here, potential problem, and that is in the bottom of this lock we now have the remainder of the retainer nut, and then of course the screw, and there you can see it clearly in there. Now that's a problem because we need to put a new screw inside of there, and that screw, if we try to drill it from this side, is now going to spin around. So all we need to do, we're simply going to take a pair of our vice grips and we're going to clamp onto it. As you see, I've already set one up here. We're just going to grab onto it, and then when we start drilling from the other side, the vice grips will prevent it from spinning around and we'll be able to drill it out just as we've done before. So that's how you get that out of there, and then you're ready to start rebuilding. Okay, I got that same lock clamped up. I got the vice grips clamped onto the back of that screw to keep it from spinning around. And now all we're going to do is we're going to drill this dude out. Get centered on the screw. And there you go. And it worked out perfectly. Again, you can see, if I can get it to focus, the head of the screw still remains on the drill bit, telling me it was absolutely the perfect size drill. Okay, one last thing I'd like to point out is if you have been faced with this problem where you've had to grind off the bottom retaining nut and get access, and then of course all the guts come out the bottom, if the pieces fall out of the top, in other words the broken pieces of the hasp then pop out, if they're not rusted in place and they simply pop out when you hit it onto your vise, again, use your pliers, clamp it onto the mangled retaining nut, and then usually, if the head is not too rusted, you can get in there and simply remove it with the screwdriver just normally. And I think, well, I hope this one comes out. There we go. So you don't have to actually drill that last screw, even though it's pretty bad shape. You save yourself some drilling and some wear and tear on your drill bits. So anyway, there you are. That's how you get access to the cores and get access to American padlocks, master padlocks, and you can also rebuild these. And that's an important part of it, because I don't like people bypassing my locks, and I don't like American telling me that I can't remove the core to repin it or to rekey it or to protect it against bypasses. So pretty powerful technique. Anyway, thanks for your time. Everybody stay safe and stay legal.